Please be advised that this episode contains material of a sensitive nature, including references to sexual abuse and suicide. Listener discretion is strongly advised.
I finally got to school, kindergarten, and said, this is fabulous. Somebody read a story, and I got to do some art and got to play outside. I'm like, everybody else may be crying, but I'm coming back.
Inspired as a young child to become a teacher, Mary identifies her great desire to be of service to others as her reason she has spent more than 50 years in education, 34 of those in the K-12 system. Along the way, while others ran away from difficult schools, she wanted to lead in schools where there were various challenges. Mary does have some heartbreaking stories to share, but also many meaningful insights to help Canadian teachers dealing with the avalanche of needs in their classrooms. And it all starts now.
Welcome to 85 After School. I'm your host, Nicole, and this is the podcast about teacher career and retirement planning through real-life stories of those who live it.
So it's my great pleasure to welcome Mary. And Mary, I'm so excited to have you here today because of your decades of experience in education. And I can't wait to hear your journey because you've done so much. Welcome to the show, Mary.
Well, thank you for inviting me. This is a really innovative experience. What a great idea you have to tap into other people's experiences. Thank you.
Yeah,
thank you for having me.
We like to share those stories with the listeners. And when you have such a wealth of knowledge that you are still involved in the education system, in different passion projects, it's really great to reel all the way back, Mary, and kind of probe you and ask you, how did you even find your way to the teaching profession?
That's a great question. As I mentioned in my own book, The 7 C's of Global Leadership, the first day of kindergarten when I had to go home halfway through the day, I thought that was the most limiting experience I had. I finally got to school, kindergarten, and said, this is fabulous. Somebody read a story, and I got to do some art, and I met new students and new children and got to play outside. I'm like, everybody else may be crying, but I'm coming back. And when I had to go home at noon, I said, someday I'm going to run my own classroom. I'm not going to send people home at lunchtime. They can stay here. And I decided the first day or two of school, I'm going to be a teacher. And it drove me, motivated me. And I think I had a natural gift right from the beginning. I used to help students with doing up their shoes. And so I came from a family that was all very working class family, not geared to education.
So Mary, the spark was quite young. You already had this vision in kindergarten. Right. I'm going to change my classroom when I get to be at the front of it.
Exactly. And I think I wanted to be first a primary teacher, and then I did become an elementary, but I really didn't want to do primary. I liked adolescence. I really valued adolescence. My high school time was amazing. I was in a convent school in Toronto in the 60s, so it was very social justice. And I had tremendous experiences that validated that this is a career that could make a difference and use my talents. And I found myself naturally wanting to lead people and introduce people to ideas and discuss things. So I ended up in intermediate grades, grade 7 and 8. That's how I started. And I loved every day.
So even though kindergarten sparked that right. Desire to become a teacher, you didn't desire to teach kindergarten.
That's right. I found the repetition a bit much. I liked the literature. I liked teaching history. The very first day that I taught, I was in grade 8. I was just turned 19. I told the school board I was 21 when I got hired. And grade 8, many people didn't want to teach grade 8. There were a lot of immigrants at that time who were held back. They weren't allowed to go to high school till they learned English. And so I ended up in a very working class area of Toronto, and I taught grade 8. I was like just a few years older than them. I thought that there was no better life.
Amazing. So you started with grade 8, and then how did your career path unfold from there?
I think because I was at a time where they were talking about education in the Teachers College, the Hall Dennis report around experiential learning, that's how I was trained. So I never really was a very rigid curriculum person. I always saw the value of integration and using the experience of the students to develop language. There were a lot of immigrants in my class. It made sense to get their experience and to help them develop vocabulary. So it was a very natural process. And it was a time before inclusion. It was just the beginning of including special ed students. So I had students who were learning disability in terms of the language, very bright kids, and they could do a map, but they couldn't do a long essay. So I would pair them up. And I just did it naturally from a student-centric. I never really knew much about special ed at the start. But I was always fascinated with behavior. So I did my degree.
From what you're telling us, you were ahead of the curve because you were doing the kinesthetic learning. You were tapping into student-centered learning, allowing them to express themselves and their knowledge.
I have to tell you that I first taught my first math class, and I was so proud of myself. The students looked like they were passing, like every day their homework was good, and I was like, I am pretty good. And then I gave the first test, and most of them failed. And I covered the window with brown paper. I thought, I can't let the principal know because I'm on probation. I can't let them know that half the student, more than half, failed. And I asked the students then, tell me why you failed. What was happening? You had your homework, looked so good. And then they admitted that they didn't know and they were afraid to ask for help. And so I put them at the blackboard. We went through the test and said, okay, from now on, when we do a test, you get 5 marks for every time you ask a question or you say, I don't know. And so what I did is I rewrote some of the ways that I presented issues for the students. So if you didn't know, you worked at the blackboard. And I discovered because of immigration, really, some of the students were way ahead and other students were way behind. And some of that was the special ed student who'd never learned their math facts. I don't know. I wanted my kids to learn. So they forced me to learn. I didn't learn the theory. I learned because I was too embarrassed to see them fail because I knew I had a part in that and I didn't know what it was. So I think relationship, I knew very early that was the key. And so for me, it was I ran classroom meetings where they got to tell me. I gave out report cards and they got to rank me. And that's how I learned. If you're a good speller, why would I make them do spelling? If they weren't a good speller, I would break it down phonetically for some or do other things. So it was only because the students gave report cards to me the day that I gave out report cards. And I allowed them to give ideas about what would help them. That's how I learned to teach.
And I think throughout your career path with that perspective and your approach to student-centered learning, my gosh, the ripple effect, there must be students that remember you long after you might have not remembered their name anymore. So what's the most memorable student interaction or story that you remember from your long, successful career that you want to share with us?
I guess the times that the students stop me on a street, because I'm back living in one of my school areas. And I've often been stopped in a no-frills store or maybe a movie theater and somebody comes up and they say, "Are you Miss? Do you remember me?" And I've had students where I took them to court way before sexual abuse was really regarded. There were no programs. People didn't believe them. So I had students who I'd gone to court with. I had a student who, my first year, attempted suicide in the bathroom. And I called for an ambulance and I was told that child not to visit the child because it's a criminal offense. And they were actually put in a juvenile detention center. And I went down, anyway, I went on the weekend and met the student. So that was when I was 19 years old. That was the time students were punished. And so some of those memories to this day always remind me that a rule is only there to guide us, but it's never to prevent us from service. And I was lucky to be in a convent school in Toronto during the time of the civil rights movement, and I've always believed that humanity and social justice should be part of everything I do. So that kind of human rights, dignity, respect, and being curious about your immigrated status is really what I find is so life-giving. It's not a burden, it's a privilege. That's how I feel.
You were shaped quite a lot by the environment you were teaching in, the students that were your clientele, if I can say it that way. And then this gift or natural talent, Mary, that I'm hearing for being able to observe behavior, being able to counsel, being able to be present, creating a safe space. Let me put it that way. So I know that you moved on from teaching because of that inner calling that you had. Maybe you can describe a bit of that.
Well, I lived in a part of Toronto where there was a provincial mental health hospital. It's the psychiatric hospital I lived near, that my school was in. And at that time in 1969, or 70, they were closing the hospitals. And in those schools, that's where they had behavior classes. Of course, I didn't know any of this. But in my class, when I was teaching, I had students whose behavior was really very concerning, violent, or very trauma-based, that I didn't even know that's what it was. But something that wasn't making sense to me. And so I started taking guidance and counseling courses on the side to understand. And I learned the value of therapeutic ways to gain insight and use that to reframe and to plan for change with a collaborative effort. I started taking guidance and counseling rather than special ed. I was really concerned that my students would learn to articulate emotion rather than act out. And it was only later I realized some of those students were dismissed from the hospital. But there was no such thing as team meetings then. There were no. So my principal at the time, sometimes things would happen where, of course, the kids would not always tell the truth in the off. He'd say, "Look, I can't get these kids to tell me. I'll take your class. You sit down with them." And that was the beginning of him advocating that they needed a guidance person. And so I became one of the first itinerant elementary guidance counselors. And then I realized for some people it was very resistant. They objected to students, especially the kids who don't work. Why should they get a period away from classroom? So I went through all of that when there was integrating of special ed and behavior and the whole shift from punishment and discipline to discipline around restorative justice, mediation, helping students become empowered with language, understanding trauma. So I took a lot of courses.
And with all that success and the impact you made on those adolescents, at one point that led you to out of the classroom, obviously, into more leadership roles where you had an even greater impact. Maybe you can describe a little bit about that.
Well, that's a really good point because I was really happy being an itinerant counselor. First of all, I didn't get caught up in some of the daily things that teachers get caught up about. I didn't do yard duty anymore, and I was allowed to work over lunchtime. So I got to work with the community organizations, Children's Hospital, I would speak to a psychiatrist there around anxiety, and I was learning as much as I was serving. And so I didn't really want to be a principal. I refused several times when I was asked, "Would you apply?" No. First of all, I had young children, and I realized, even in counseling, what kids do when there's no parent at home. They're usually on the street hanging out. And so I said, that's not going to happen for my children. I have to be there. And I was not enthralled with the way I saw principals work. I didn't see myself as a big disciplinarian. I resisted being a principal.
And so at one point, though, you stopped resisting and
Yes.
did step into leadership.
A couple times just before I decided to do it. My children were finishing high school, so I was very late being a principal. And secondly, a few of the resistance, I didn't want to leave the work. But when they separated the principals from the union, that's when they kept telling me, "You're going to go back to the classroom." And I said, "Okay." They said, "No, you have to go take care of a school. We'll put you in." I said, "Only if you're going to put me in a school where there's lots of special ed. It's got to be a big school because I'll be so bored."
Yeah.
And ended up right downtown in Toronto in a very high-risk area. And I loved being there.
Interdisciplinary skills and being able to connect with students. And you're actually running to something that a lot of people run away from.
I know. I went there in August to set up, and I realized Nelson Mandela was coming. And I walked in the neighborhood and talked to a few people and realized there was a big group of African students in my school. And they didn't know who Nelson Mandela was because they came from Zaire, not South Africa. They were in a refugee camp. So I was like, this is bizarre. Like, Nelson Mandela's coming. We should be going to see him. So I got enough tickets to take my intermediate students. They went to see Nelson Mandela, and I was like, this is why I'm here as the principal. And I realized then, you know what? I can't look back. I have to stay in a leadership spot to change a tone here, to empower teachers to think in a way that would build them up. At least that's what I tried to do. I had a call from the Global Affairs that I had a student in jail in Belgium that was held by the police. And of course, I didn't believe who was on the phone. I said, I don't believe you. And I hung up 3 times. And I said, you give me your number and I'll call you back. It was in Belgium. They had the French accent. So I finally connected with somebody. I can't remember exactly how, but it was through Canada's Ottawa division. And the police told me, we have a student here. And when we asked their name, they will only give their first name. And they told me that you are their principal. They won't tell us where they're from. Like, they knew they were from Toronto. The child admitted, and I have to be careful because I don't want to say the name of the child, but the child told the police, my principal, I belong to my principal in the school, and said the name of the school. So they found me in Toronto. Wow. And the police went on the phone and said, we have so-and-so, and she won't cooperate. I said, well, put her on the phone.
Yeah.
Oh, no, we can't do that. Yeah, call me tomorrow. Put her on the phone. I'll talk to her. So they put her on the phone, and I asked her, how come you're giving those people a hard time? You belong here in school. We have to get you back to school. We have to get you on a plane. She said, my mother went back to Zaire and took me and left me at the train station and went back to Zaire. So the police don't believe me.
Oh my God.
I said, I believe you, but the problem is, like, you're bigger than me. Like, I'm 5'2". You look like you're probably like grade 10. So they're harder on you because you're so tall. And you have to tell them your last name.
Yeah.
I'm not talking to them until they give me back my backpack. I said, okay, tell the police to talk. That's exactly what I did. I said, give her back her backpack. All she does is read. There's nothing in there that would hurt her. Give her her book. She writes and reads. She's brilliant. She's been in a refugee camp. She's smarter than half of the people I know. And that's what happened. They got in touch with Children's Aid and she came back to school. To this day, that is one of the most powerful things. You don't realize, being the principal, the impact. But obviously, she felt like she belonged in that school.
And the trust she had that her anchor was you, Mary.
That she identified herself belonging to a school.
Yeah.
Not a family, but a school.
And to you, anchor to you. It's a safe space for her. That's incredible. Unbelievable.
To me, that's the most humbling experience.
You always were advocating for your students and community at large. There came a time, though, that you decided, I'm pivoting to something else. I'm doing the retirement from K-12 education system because I have all these other passions I want to pursue. Maybe you can describe a little bit of the passions you pursued after leaving K-12.
Well, I have to say, I worked for 33 years in the system. And I left because one day I looked out the window and I saw that my school was calm. And I'd implemented, believe it or not, some reflective papers that if you were in trouble, you had to write your paper out. What was the problem? What was the solution? And students were able to come to the office and we would work on discipline. I just felt I'd done everything I wanted to do. It shocked me, actually. I looked out and I said, you know what? I've accomplished my goals. I don't want to be a superintendent. I'm finished. I can't believe it, but I left without a plan.
Wow.
Cursed myself many times. I thought I would go back to counseling, so I opened my practice again, and I became very bored. I realized the one-on-one, although it's intimate, it was not enough for change. So I took an opportunity to go to Dominica, the only medical school in the world that has a school for children on campus.
Wow.
So it was in the Caribbean, and I thought, okay, I'll go there, and I'll have a great time for 2 years. And while I was there a few months, met a head of behavior science. His child was in the class, in the school, and I spoke to him about an issue and said, you probably want to fire me, but I think there's an issue here. And he was a psychiatrist, and he laughed. He said, how do you know that? I said, I know children, and your child's bright, but you're holding her up. Like, you have an issue, something. Anyway, he laughed and asked me to teach behavior science. Within a couple months, I started teaching on half-day behavior science, doing the intake with the med students, with community patients. And I did that a few times, and I realized, yes, they were going through the body parts, like, yes, their head, their eye, they would go through the systems, how was their kidney functioning? And they were getting 10 out of 10 or 9 out of 10, like they were doing all the right thing. And it distressed me one day. And I said, this person here from the village is on kidney dialysis. And although he knows that, you don't really know why. It bothers me. He said, are you depressed? The patient said, no. I said, I'm never going to do this again because I wasn't supposed to, but I'm going to talk to this person as a person, not check. So I got the person to tell me, how did he end up on dialysis? And it turned out it was the toxicity from the spray on the banana farm. And as a result, of course, he lost his energy. He couldn't go to church. He couldn't work. He lost the farm. He lost work. He lost money. He lost connections in the community. And he was very depressed. And as a result, we talked about that. And it was very scary. And I had him talk to the psychiatrist to get some meds. And it was then I said, I'm not happy with the way they're doing things. So they weren't too happy with me at the beginning. Like, we brought you here to be a principal. Now you've gone into this lane. And now you're starting to tell us that we need to improve the education. Because there's a cultural piece that's missing for me.
Yeah.
There's no credit for the culture. I don't understand that. But that's how I ended up doing my PhD. And so I did my qualitative research on how do the students learn professionalism in their preclinical years. And it's the only research done in a offshore American school in the Caribbean on professionalism. Thankfully, the last 6 months of the dissertation, the study, the research timed with when my contract was up. So I was there for 6 years.
With all that experience, Mary, I know that you're still involved in teaching in some parts, but is there anything you miss about the formal aspect of teaching?
When I think of my grandchildren, well, my younger ones, and there's a Christmas concert, I could have tears in my eyes, not because I think of Santa or just the children's voices when they come out and Some child always stumbles, runs off, or waves to their mother, or disrupts the whole thing. And the teachers are really stressed because they have worked so hard and somebody didn't show up on time or something. There's always craziness. And I used to love it. I used to think, there's no better job in the whole world. Look at these kids. Like, they're feeling so confident and they're performing and their parents are proud and people are here in the community. So I think those kind of things I miss. I don't miss the reading of report cards.
Yeah, no, nobody does.
If I had to do it again, I would probably do much more group mindfulness practices and helping people understand what what the body's trying to tell us rather than see it pathologically.
Yeah.
I think those are normal responses to the stress.
It's your body telling you something, and what skill set can you build for resilience in that sense.
Right, exactly.
I'm wondering, Mary, with all your different types of projects and experiences and the different jobs you held within the education system, once you stepped into retirement, I know you've already hinted at, I didn't have a plan, but what was the most unexpected thing once you retired?
I think there's a personal review of your identity. When you're working, people know, okay, you're a teacher, or you're working, you're valued. But when you're not working, people think, well, now you're finished, you're over. And I did a few volunteer things, but they were so minor that I knew I wouldn't do that again. I actually do a lot of volunteer, but I mentor students, helping them with resumes. To me, I'll do that. And so there were things I had to explore to say, God, I've never had time for a hobby. What about this? So it was a great chance to explore some things. But for me, it validated, no, I'm not interested in baking. I don't want to bake. So I found myself always finding a different way to serve. And I think my deep social values, my deep belief in justice, in community, in humanizing workspaces has helped me to find a different way to serve rather than, feed up. And it's allowed me to join and experiment and have some other experiences. I don't see myself ever not, maybe it could be volunteer, but I do speak and I do go to stages where I'm facilitating a workshop and on leadership.
Well, and as you've declared, your core passion for learning and being a lifelong learner and your passion for social justice and helping others, being in service of others is really the line that connects everything from when you were young all the way through to what you're currently doing. Now that you're thinking about these teachers that are still in the trenches and those that are, ready to start their careers, what advice would you have for beginning, middle, and late career teachers in relation to their career planning?
I think, first of all, they have to remember they're first a learner. And secondly, that they belong to community. So if they're surrounded by people in community where they're not growing, they need to find a different community, or they need to find someone as a mentor. I think that's what I miss. Now that I do coaching for women in particular, I don't know how I managed without a coach. I've made a lot of mistakes. If I'd had someone who'd coached me, I might not have had such anxiety about certain things. Or maybe I would have worked on my imposter syndrome a lot earlier. Or maybe I would have been more compassionate to myself for the risks I took and some of the isolation I experienced as a result of being a change maker. And I think the worst thing that can happen is people burn out because not so much that they work hard, because I think all teachers work hard, it's they lack community. They lack that reflective time to reflect on their experience, celebrate what they've done well. Sometimes we need to step back, reflect on what we're doing well, celebrate those gains and find the joy in the work and find a community to celebrate and have joy.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Sometimes it's hard to see the forest for the trees when you're in the thick of it. And so it's difficult to translate that into everyday practice. I wonder if you have any strategies that you think...
I did myself every day, took 10 minutes at the end of the day to say, ask myself what went well, what didn't. Some of my coaching work, along with my book, is to look at the patterns around our competencies, like conflict, communication, curiosity. Was I curious today and did I have a chance to explore that? What could I do now? So if it's not joyful, it's not meaningful, it's not aligned with my values, I need to start looking at what's my plan to help myself.
Mary, you've mentioned your book. Maybe you can let the listeners know a little bit more detail, the title and where they can find it and what it's about.
The book is a reflective practice toolkit. At 7 competencies as a leader that we all have. We all have them. We just aren't aware somehow, sometimes where we're stuck or where we're really strong. So this book is a way to take each of the competencies and ask 10 questions to get us moving so that we could do that inward journey work that's required of a leader. I cannot include you if I haven't looked at ways I've included myself or ways I'm empowering myself or experienced the growth as being difficult or challenging or I want to avoid learning. We all are like that. We're more comfortable being with what we know.
Yeah.
And I use it for a coaching program that I have developed.
And what's the title and where can listeners find it?
The title is The 7 C's, ABC, 7 C's of Global Leadership, an inward journey into leadership. And it's available on Amazon, but if they go to my website, marygrogan.com, they can connect with me and I could make sure that they have a copy in some direction and a free session around how to incorporate that with their team.
That's amazing. We'll put the contact details in the show notes of this episode, and then people will be able to reach out to you, Mary. I'm wondering if you could go back in a time machine with all the knowledge you have now, is there anything you would have done differently in retirement?
I would have found a mentor, somebody who I really admired as a leader to help me grow consciously. I would have done a more regular practice of yoga to make sure my mind and body was connected so I didn't get ill at the end of every term. I would have taken some more courses in mindfulness and meditation. So I think mentoring and mindfulness practices to help me connect to myself.
So I think those are great suggestions. And on a high level, Mary, what financial planning did you need to do, if any, before you decided to retire?
Well, first of all, if I had to do it again, I would have taken a financial planning course so I'd even have the language. I did not ever pay attention to finance. I've made a lot of mistakes because I've let things sit in accounts that I didn't know what to do with. I never paid attention to it. And I think it's because in a system we're given money every week. It's not like we have a pension. So I think there's a certain laziness, irresponsibility, lack of accountability, lack of belief that it was something crucial for me. I've never been really motivated by money. And that's a bit crazy now at this time of the world where things cost so much, and I have grandchildren I'd like to support in different ways. And I'd like to take them to theater. So I have plans where I think if I'd only saved money in a different way, if I'd only been aware, I can't believe what I didn't know. And I still don't know. I'm still learning.
Thank you for your candidness and honesty in that. And I think that will go a long ways with our listeners as well.
Very good.
Mary, we've reached the part of the show where I ask every guest to contribute a gem, like one insight to help the full-time teachers and educators still in the trenches in our K-12 classrooms across Canada.
I think it's find your joy. If you're in the wrong class or you're finding yourself getting burnt out, use it as an invitation to learn. There's no such thing as a mistake. So I think this is a big privilege to be an educator. And I believe, as Martin Luther King said, that it's about character and content. That's the role of education. Although these are challenging times, just remember how much of a privilege it is to work in a classroom, because we can bring life and hope with the learning. And that's what I think. I think if you don't have joy and you don't feel your work is hopeful, it's time you reconsider, what can I do differently? Who can I help? Who can I get to help me? Because maybe I need to take a pause and breath and redefine where I want to work, how I want to use my gifts. Because the minute we lose joy, it's not helpful.
It's beautifully said, Mary. And it's so true in our hectic day-to-day lives. We just need to calm our minds, listen to our hearts, and act with humanity.
Absolutely. We can't build communities of peace if we don't work on getting our own peace.
That's right. We have to be in that proper state of mind, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And our body needs to be calm. I have a Facebook group, Women Leaders Global Network, and my goal is to support and empower women so that they claim their power as a change maker, as a leader. There is no one that gets a leadership role and is supported. And women, on top of that, are often juggling a lot of stereotypes, a lot of misconceptions about women. If you're strong, people think that you're aggressive. There's a lot of language that goes into stereotyping. And so women do a lot more doubting at times, particularly if they're juggling family and still doing all the work. Like, how do we manage? Well, I believe if I run a group, I want to share free on the group. I want to share weekly something from my book to help people become aware of their competency and grow as leaders so they can be all that they can be.
And leadership as a woman can be isolating at times, Mary. And
absolutely,
being able to have a group like this is just such a welcoming lead. Mary, it's been such a pleasure speaking to you. And I hope down the road I can have you again for a follow-up, because I feel there is much more to explore with all your experiences and knowledge. So thank you for taking the time to speak with me today.
Thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure to be with you. This kind of exchange I think it's missing for teachers. We need to inspire each other along the way, no matter whether you're a beginner, person in the middle, or at the end of our career. We're all educators every time we step into a space.
And celebrate and find that joy, as you say.
Exactly. Beautiful. Thank you.
Thanks again, Mary.
Thank you.
Well, that's our show for today. Thanks for joining us. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you know when new episodes are uploaded. We'd also love to hear your feedback. Leave a review or connect with us on Instagram or Facebook at 85 After School. Hey, if you're interested in being a guest, be sure to email us directly, 85afterschool@gmail.com. That's 85afterschool@gmail.com. Until the next episode, be good to yourself.